My grandfather was a 2 times gold medalist in mathematics in Bangladesh. And that put a lot of pressure and expectation, I think, on his grandchildren. So, people who had studied with him and who knows him kind of assumed, because my mother was not a mathematician, so it's from my mother's side, my mother's father. So they assumed that I would be, because my mother didn't get the mathematics kind of genius, so they assumed I would be kind of like the prodigy of maths, which was completely wrong. I was useless in maths. But what was really interesting, it had an impact on me psychologically and emotionally and in the development of my character because everybody expected me to be this great mathematician. I truly believed I must be a mathematician, even if I fail all the time. Maybe the people who are kind of checking my answers are wrong. I must be right. And so I started to look at patterns. And so I'm definitely not a mathematician, that's for sure. But I would say I'm mathematical and geometrical, or I'm mathematical when it comes to patterns, movement patterns, or patterns of structure or bodies in space. In that way, I'm mathematical. But also I studied rhythm, and Indian music is very dense when it comes to mathematics and rhythm. Rhythm and mathematics go hand in hand. You have to understand the mathematics of it to understand how to manipulate the rhythm and vice versa. And so in a sense, rhythm became my kind of outlet, even though I'm not a mathematical genius at all. I'm not even good at maths, but it had an impact on me. And that's why, perhaps that's partly the reason why I got involved in choreographing, because I was choreographing very early without realizing it, because I was always fascinated by patterns, a bit like the way Stravinsky thought, where he said he used patterns to create emotion, and not necessarily melody, but patterns, structures. And in a sense, I was always fascinated by that as well. There was a wonderful choreographer called Saburo Teshigawara who once said, in life and death, we're continuously moving. In life, we're breathing, so you're constantly moving. Even if you're standing still, you're moving internally. But in death, your body continues to decompose. So both in life and death, you're always in movement. So nothing is ever still, really. So movement is the essential ingredient of how the world continues or survives. I've always been involved in some way in theatre. When I was a child, I had the great fortune of working with Peter Brook for many years. And so theatre has always been close to me. But patterns mean nothing if there isn't a story in it. And so in a sense, I see theatre, when I hear words, for me, those are, it's a form of music. And each actor has their own music. And it's not just about, it's a combination of music, the movement of the actor, but also the kind of the story, the way they express, the way they put emotion to that. And so when I came to working with Juliette Binoche, this collaboration, it was very fascinating because here was an actress who didn't have necessarily the tools that a dancer has. But when you don't have something, it gives space for something else. It's if you fill everything up into that body, it doesn't have space for anything else. And what was interesting was to see, well, there isn't that kind of information that a dancer has in an actor's body or Juliette's body. But what would be interesting is to see what will come out what will come out that is different to a dancer's body. And I think that was fascinating because her dance was an emotional dance, because that's what actors connect to first, the emotion of it. So there's emotional energy and there's physical energy. And what was interesting with dance, generally, let's say, the dancer's body is more physical energy and less emotional energy. And with actors' body, it's more emotional energy and less physical energy. But then again, I'm generalizing, because there are some actors who are extremely physical. But I was fascinated. It was like almost like a blank canvas. There were no movements. She had to create and improvise movements, and I was learning a lot from that. I mean, I spend a lot of time watching my little girl move. She's 1.5, and I think the most interesting movements come out of there, because they're not coming out of the mind. They're not coming out of an intellectual decision. It's very instinctive and very animalistic. And for me, those are the kind of movements that are the most truthful. So in a sense, with Juliette, there was something very truthful in her movement. I think the most exciting part of any collaboration is when you're seeing a very different perspective of the same subject. So, even if I have a Coke can, just a simple Coke can, a visual artist will see the Coke can very differently to the way a choreographer would see it, or to the way a filmmaker would see it, or to the way an actress would see it, or an actor. And so that for me, those different perspective helps me learn a lot about art. Michael Jackson, Bruce Lee, Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Fred Astaire, Muhammad Ali. These have been my heroes when I was growing up, and still are my heroes. Particularly more so now with Charlie Chaplin, and what he does with movement and narrative on film. He's a genius. And so is Michael Jackson, but Michael Jackson is more of a live performer, until I saw Thriller. And then I thought, wow, how dance and music and narrative can come across on screen fascinated me. It was truly inspiring. I haven't worked so much with film, even though I use camera in the studio, but it's more as a reflection. It's more to see what I've done. It's more clinical. But I haven't really tapped into the film, but I've always been fascinated. I've made a solo called Dish, which is about my father in Bangladesh and memories and many other things. And I've been talking to several film productions about making this into a film. I think the biggest, and I'm really curious to imagine how we would transpose this into film. Because, when I was a student at university, I came across Pina Bausch, which was more of a documentation of the show. But then I came across DV8, which was specifically a film, and which involved physical theater, which was all about a narrative, and it had movement. And I remember being struck how film could take something that's alive and retransform it to feel like it's alive, except it has very different possibilities and many more possibilities. And so film has always been one of my strongest form of inspiration in all the work that I do, particularly Dish and Itmoy, which is the piece that I made inspired by Rite of Spring, Stravinsky. I look at stage productions, let's say, as if I would look at films. It's almost cinematic, because I'm hugely influenced by films, especially art films. I would love to be involved in creating a film. The only thing is, I'm very cautious because I haven't spent my whole life on film. I've spent most of my life in a theater. So it's a different language. There are different tools. So I would never dare to say that, oh, I would like to direct a film on my own without support or without people who really know how the film works. But it's been a dream of mine to direct one of my own pieces from theater to film. I don't feel dance is important in education at all. I think it's absolutely vital that it is in education. What I refer to my child again, my little girl. When I see her, she's the most creative right now. Somehow, through education, we are the creativity is driven out of us to conform to who we are today. And I think that's frightening. You can say things through your body that you can never say through your words. A few years ago, I would say, we all fear to be still, dancers, because we're trained to move. But when I say still, you're never still, as I said earlier, but still as in standing and not executing another kind of movement. I think the older I become, the more comfortable I become. I prefer to be still than moving. It's harder to move. But my fear is for about 3 minutes before I get on stage. For those 3 minutes, I'm terrified, and more and more. And I was wondering why that happens, because I should be more confident. Once I'm on stage, once I step onto the stage, the fear completely disappears and adrenaline kicks in, and experience or a sense of knowing where you are kicks in. But those 3 minutes before the show, I'm terrified. The more you know, the more you realize how little you know. Because actually you realize that, when you're young, you kind of think you know everything. You know a little bit, but you think you know the world. And before you step onto the stage, as you get older, you start to realize, actually, it's a big world. Creativity, the stage is limitless. And you're not in control once you're on stage. It's like I did a piece with Sylvie Guillem a few years back, which was called Sacred Monsters, because on the one side the stage is a sacred, but on the other side it's a monster, because anything can happen. You're doing the same thing, but anything can happen. Things can change, and that's why you do it. That's partly it's a kind of not poison, but it's a kind of a drug, because you want to see if you can do it again. And when you're going to do it again, it's not going to be the same. I think it's like, perhaps it's like asking a motorbike racer why they risk their lives at that speed to race every year, even though they know their friend died the year before, or they had an accident, they will still get back on the bike. Because when you're in that point, when you step onto stage, you're in that point where everything becomes uncertain. But I think that's when you live the most.